And don't worry, everyone. I completely forgot I had the little acquiring tea there, and I did actually acquire tea today. So let's get started. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name's SgtZdog, and we are back for some more Flashpoint campaigns. We're doing more of the tutorial series. This is number 3. We're doing the armor section now, and I have with me Liam again, of course, and Jeff couldn't make it today, so instead we have Jim with us, who's also been part of the OTS team for many years. I don't remember how many. Um,
Forever, basically.
yeah, yeah. And I did slightly derp here and forget to bring up before we get started the video. Do you have the link to that real quick, Liam?
Yeah, let me pull that up for you. It'll just give me 1 minute.
I been such a busy day trying to get everything ready for this stream, and I just like completely forgot about needing that until now.
And I will actually post the link in general if people want to look at it on their own time. But
There we
there it
go.
is for you too.
Yeah, so we'll watch that now.
The arm of decision.
So
Tanks
yeah,
are
this live
crucial
stream is part of our
weapons
little
that need to
tutorial
be
series
carefully
to,
rationed and
help you
committed.
get used to Cold
An
War
armored
combat.
company in the open can engage and destroy battalions of IFVs or APCs from kilometers away while maintaining a rapid advance. Tanks are firepower, speed, and protection concentrated in an expensive single vehicle. Cold War armor varies widely in quality. Cutting-edge vehicles like the Abrams and T-80 serve alongside other platforms like the Leopard 1, AMX-30, and T-55. Using the subunit inspector, you can identify the key capabilities of each vehicle from its main gun to its armor and optics. Modern tank designs have better rangefinders and fire control systems than older models, allowing them to engage targets accurately further out. The chief advantage of tanks are that they remain powerful combatants while moving and have the protection to survive in the open. Tanks are the key weapon in flanking movements, attacking across open ground and acting as your mobile reserve. A tank's mobility is just as much a weapon as its main
Hey, we're gonna
cannon.
be doing that scenario.
While tanks are well protected, they're distinctly vulnerable to many dedicated anti-armor weapons. Anti-tank vehicles will massacre armor with long-range ATGMs. Infantry are equipped with shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons, and in close contact, they can hide and ambush tanks. Aircraft and helicopters can massacre armored units with rockets and guided missiles. Tanks alone won't win you a battle. Like every other arm, they need proper support. The solution to the problems tanks face is combined arms warfare. If you detect enemy anti-tank weapons, consider going around them, deploying smoke, or massing artillery fire to suppress them. Use your infantry to clear complex terrain occupied by enemy infantry, or simply bypass them. Concentrate your air defense coverage around your armored formations. They are a high priority target for your enemy. The tank is the modern-day heavy cavalryman, a serious investment of national resources that should not be wasted in unprepared frontal assaults, but carefully committed to the sectors of the battlefield that are crucial to success.
Man, I really like our main menu music. All right, so we're diving in. The scenario we're going to use today to kind of talk a little bit more about this is Regulars Forward, which has two American battalions against a reinforced Warsaw Pact Russian battalion. One of the American battalions is 3 companies of tanks. The other one is 3 companies of mechanized infantry. This is July of '89, so they're mechanized in M113s. So basically, they have a ride to the front and no IFV support once they get there. The Warsaw Pact is a motorized rifle battalion that's been reinforced with 2 of the brigades or regiments, I think, independent. Uh, uh, independent. 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 Uh, it's independent tank battalion. It has two of the companies out of that tank. So they have three rifle companies and two tank companies, and we are assaulting them. This is kind of an interesting scenario in that there's relatively little fire support. So the Americans only have a single M109 battery and a mortar battery that'll come on in half an hour after the scenario starts. And the Warsaw Pact, I think, just has the one mortar battery that's organic to the battalion. And then each side has some helicopters.
Bit of an atypical scenario in that way. Like one is that, well, the Soviets are on the defensive, which is, they don't like to do that. They like to attack, and a paucity of or should I say scarcity of artillery. Soviets usually at this level they'd have at least a battery of like Akatsayas or like Gvazdikas, but just mortars. Not as much as they usually like to have.
Yeah. And that's definitely going to have an impact on this scenario for both sides, really. One of the other interesting bits about this scenario is that it starts at 7 o'clock. Dusk starts in an hour and a half, give or take. And so a lot of the scenario, unless you really rush the objective, is going to take place at night. Um, that gives a very slight edge to the Americans. But one of the key differences in this scenario in the equipment is that the Abrams have thermal sights rather than night vision sights. Uh, Jim, do you want to talk about that a little bit with regard to how the thermal might be impacted versus night vision around the dusk period that's going to take place over most of the first 2 hours?
Right. Thermal sights are really good if you're dealing with either daytime or at night when temperatures have settled from the transition points. And those transition points are sunup and sunset. And you go through something called thermal inversion. And that's where temperatures, ambient, kind of pass through the point of objects on the ground. So if you've been sitting out all day and say you got enemy tanks in the city there and they've been heating up in the sun, once that sun starts to go down and they start to cool off, you'll reach a point where those temperatures can kind of cross each other, and thermal sights at that point not as effective. They're still very good at finding things, but they're definitely degraded during those couple of hours of transition. So, if you're going to want to utilize your M1s or thermal sights on other vehicles or personnel, you know, trying to avoid that time of day as best as possible is something to do. And especially dealing with the fact that you're going into, we'll say, complex terrain there with city and trees and some decent hills. Picking up targets during that inversion is going to be tough.
Yeah. So,
Um,
to, yeah, and so to that end, there's three objectives very close to each other on this map. And the tanks, American tanks especially, or NATO tanks especially, want to kind of keep at that range advantage if they can. Like they have that mobile firepower aspect for being tanks, but they want to keep the range open as much as possible to avoid things like the RPGs, um, the Warsaw Pact stuff that isn't quite as good, and so generally needs to be just a little bit closer. Um, so if we can kind of keep that range open, uh, that's where we do want to be. Though we do have limits. If we look at our sensors on these Abrams, the thermal sight can still identify out to 3 kilometers, which is 6 hexes, which for a lot of our southern storm maps, um, you're lucky if you can get a shot at more than 6 hexes anyway. Um, but if we look at, say, our infantry, um, their night vision stuff is only good for a half kilometer identification. They can detect something out to a full kilometer.
And that's assuming there's enough illumination on the
Yes.
ambient sky, moon, whatever. Because again, that's a big difference. A thermal sight, it works on temperature. It doesn't, care if there's a moon or not. When you start talking night vision or light amplification, you've got to have enough clear sky that you get the starlight. The more full the moon is, the better. If there's clouds or overcast, of course, that's going to cut your night vision down. You'll see in a number of scenarios if it's in the absolute dark, that illumination drops to zero. You can pretty much run over something in your hex and miss it,
Mm-hmm.
unless they're shooting or moving around. It becomes very difficult to see when it's just completely pitch black. Again, that's where the thermal sight will definitely help you out, because you'll see those warmer targets against the cooler nighttime ambient and surroundings.
Yeah,
I'd
and
imagine.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, especially in those woods, I imagine if it's a dark night, underneath the tree canopy, it's going to be brutal down there.
Oh yeah,
Although for the attacker, not necessarily a bad thing if you need to close the distance.
right. Yeah, again, that's kind of that masking your approach thing that you want to look at. Kind of looking at this map, there's a fair number of hills, trees, towns. I don't know if Kevin can bring up the McCoo or not, but uh,
Yes.
the 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 lanes, the fire lanes, are not going to be a lot of them. Yeah, you can see with all that red in there, you've got a pretty decent approach lane. I'll say they're kind of to the north of the map between the minefields. There's a kind of a gray slice for about 2 to 3 kilometers. But you know, you can come down from the north. You can kind of come from the west a bit. The southern route, you're going to be right into the city. Coming up to the south, you're going to pop out of that tree line, and even with night vision gear, you're going to be a decent target. So it's a difficult approach. You've got a little bit of room. So
Yeah.
you've got to kind of be aware and take the time to look and see what are my best approaches. Now, for your 113s and things where you basically just infantry carrying, you don't have a lot of combat use of those vehicles. That covered approach there to the south at least gets you within that short sprint distance into the town with your
Mm-hmm.
infantry units. So you might be able to use that to an advantage, or potentially even kind of swing around more to the east and northeast of the town to use the tree line as cover. So
Yep.
he's got kind of a decent plan set up there to bring some of those units around, and then kind of use your armor down the main corridor to use that long range reach.
Not sure why, for some reason, the HQ unit for this company is wanting to go a completely different route. Um, let's.
It could be SOP.
Yeah, it looked like it was
Then
the
one
same,
other
but
thing to consider, um, especially going into night and if illumination is poor, is that the movement rate of vehicles drops dramatically.
yeah.
Um, even on a road, because you're in a wartime condition, you know, you're not running with super bright headlights out in front of you and everything else. So normally, a lot of vehicles, it's some infrared driving gear, so it's an IR light, and the driver might have IR sight capability. Um, M1 tanks, you might have some thermal capability. The guys in the 113s, it's slow going because they might have a little bit of night vision to help them, but you're really slowed down. And if you're in complex terrain, again, a lot of hills and trees, you're going to slow to a crawl moving through there in the dark, mainly because you don't want to bump into somebody um, when you're basically just not looking around.
Yeah. And that is a very real risk, of course, that
Oh yeah.
they all run um, doing that sort of
It,
stuff.
Right. And there's different, at night, and I'll throw in a story from a buddy of mine who was in a 113 back in the 80s, and they were doing a night exercise and they were out driving, and um, the lieutenant that was kind of had his head up out of the hatch trying to see things, because it's not easy again in the dark with not much light, um, was having them kind of move a little too fast. He really couldn't see as well as the driver with the IR gear, and the driver in the distance spots a chicken coop, and they try to tell the lieutenant about it, and the lieutenant's like, I know where I'm going. And of course, bam, they drilled a chicken coop in the middle of the German countryside.
Yeah.
There were feathers and chicken bits everywhere. He said it took him, a good day or two to clean the track from all the debris.
Yeah, I believe
Oh
that.
yeah, you don't want to drive fast at night in the countryside.
Yeah, I know way back when I was still in school, I got to have a World War II vet speaking to us, and he was talking about like, they're in their Shermans just trying to watch the little reflector off the tank in front of them, and at one point, I don't remember if he said it was his tank or one of the other tanks in his platoon, lost sight of the tank in front of them as they're like traversing the mountains, and they went right off the roadway, and just, fortunately, the off the edge of the roadway there was trees right there to catch the tank. But it's like, there's serious risk there when you're driving at night because it's really hard to see even in the daylight out of a tank. That's I know that's one of the big reasons they're talking about, the next gen Abrams needs to still have 4 crew is to keep that extra pair of eyeballs able to help look outside the tank.
Yeah, I was
Let's
just
see.
about to bring up situational awareness is, it's a critical factor, and when you're buttoned up in a tank, it becomes tougher to do that. Now, when you get into the 80s, especially the late 80s with like the Abrams series, and I think maybe the Challenger and getting into like the Leopard 2s, you started getting things like the commander's independent thermal sight. So the
Mm-hmm.
commander can be looking around, scouting for targets, and viewing the terrain with a thermal like the gunner. The driver, again, is usually got night vision. I think later on they get into some thermal. I think that's kind of post 80s. So the more eyes you get out there, and that's why when units are traveling in a combat formation, they're slow. They're generally dispersed, so they're not a great target. And there's usually some eyes looking forward, eyes looking left, eyes looking right. And if you're really not sure about the terrain, you got eyes looking behind you too, in
Mm-hmm.
case you drove past somebody. And it's modeling that kind of environment it's not easy. Um, and that's where you get into we do differentiate between kind of the hasty road movement, and even saying that that's hasty is quasi misnomer. You don't get on the autobahn in a set of tanks in a combat environment and drive 60 kilometers or 80 kilometers an hour. You're still slow, and 20 to 24, 25 kilometers an hour. When you go off road, it slows down a bit more as you disperse and set out. Generally, because you're moving a short distance, grabbing some ground that you can conceal with, checking for the enemy, and you're bounding overwatches, and that slows things down. If you're in an assault like you may be here, you kind of disperse and go off road, but you're more interested about covering ground versus having that bounding screening approach that you might do if you're like moving to contact, or if you're in a reverse bounding movement where you're basically defending over a distance.
Mm-hmm.
So again, those speeds and the tempo of things not really as fast as people would think. Really, the only time that vehicles, even approach their, I'll say rated maximum speeds is if it's some kind of emergency. You're pulling back to a draw off of a bad location. trying to sprint to cover. And it's generally going to, again, be short distances and short time at those speeds and positions, mainly because, again, you don't want to walk into an even worse situation.
Yeah.
Um, and the AI is kind of human-like in the fact that at times I know it frustrates players, but like a unit will move and it apparently move into an enemy, instead of moving away. But you run into the question that, did they really see that guy or did a different unit spot that guy? And I think a lot of folks miss the fact that, in the battlefield of the 80s, while there's decent communication, it's not the interconnected digital battlefield of today where if a tank a kilometer away spots an enemy, I get kind of that instant map update in my tank and I know that guy's sitting there and I can start to adjust for it. Here, unless I know and I've been plotting where that guy is, and he comes on the radio and says, "Hey, I've got contact 2 kilometers to my northeast," and I can go, "Oh, that's about there." You know, you're doing a lot of that stuff on the fly in your head, and in some cases, it just doesn't matter. You're worried about your own sector and your own, lane of effort, unless something comes off the rail.
Yep.
So again, when you're plotting an armored advance like this, spreading your guys out, making sure that you're aware of where you think the enemy might be. That's an objective area up there, but if I'm the Soviets and I notice I got some hills and trees in front of me, uh, great places for ATGM teams, guys with recoilless rifles,
Yeah.
some RPGs, because I might get some shots as somebody passes through some of those narrow passageways.
Especially with all these minelets that can help protect those units as well.
Yep, no, that's a good point. I'm
Uh,
thinking there's some trees and there's that little open break where one of the middle artillery rounds is going through. That looks like a decent corridor to drive down. But if there's bad guys in the tree line on either side,
It's a bad day
and it
for you
looks like
real quick.
and it looks like that's a hill over there too. So
Yep.
yeah, you're going to start getting hammered on top of your tank with fairly accurate fire at those short distances.
Okay.
So we opened up this this stream with that like tutorial video, and it talked about how tanks, the big advantage is they got the firepower and they got the protection, the speed to work in the open. They're not like infantry; you kind of need to deploy and really thrive in fixed terrain or complex terrain. But there's all these caveats to it, right? So like the armor can function in the open, but that doesn't mean to a player, don't think that you can just drive up with your M1A1s to a Soviet line, like a fortified line, and think that you can survive, every
Yeah.
ATGM they throw at you. I've seen Abrams do some crazy stuff in this game. This is 1989. The M1A1 is a really cutting edge piece of tech. It's the best thing on the battlefield, really. But there's still have to be very careful about how you deploy them. They're worth a lot, and so you really do want to be careful about each one is very valuable. I've seen a whole platoon wipe out a BMP battalion on attack. The platoon of Abrams was just on a hill overlooking a nice like a freeway, and the Soviet battalion came driving right down through the valley that on that freeway, and they just were absolutely massacred.
Yeah, and that's going to happen. Again, you've got just getting into the basics of again, what is the tank? Well, in the case of an Abrams, especially the M1A1, you're upgunned with the 120 millimeter smoothbore, and it's got a very good fire control system. It's a highly stabilized tank, so when you lay the gun on a target in the distance, even rolling over broken and uneven terrain, that gun barrel stays fixed to the target. Um, very, all movements, if any. That's a highly stabilized platform. Now, your Warsaw Pact, your Soviet tanks have okay stabilization, um, especially in the later portion of the 80s. But generally, they're not a full, I'll say like two-axis stabilization. And in a lot of cases, for I'll say a lot of the earlier Soviet tanks, you're looking at your 64s and 72s, and even getting at 55s and 54s. In most cases, they will find an enemy, stop, and shoot, so that they are stable when they fire. A lot of their systems also have to deal with the fact that they've got auto loaders, and the gun has to elevate to eject the shell, which takes you off the target line. So again, an advantage, unlike the Abrams and other NATO tanks, where there's the a gunner and a loader, is I can keep my gun trained on where the targets are. So I've got a load of Sabo, I fire, I kill a tank. The gunner's starting to rotate to the next target, the loader's pulling its shell, and 10, 15 seconds later, bang, there's another AP round going down range. When you're dealing with auto loaders, Warsaw Pact, I think the French, other folks, it's a bit slower, and it's got to kick out the shell. It has to index it, bring up a new one. And while you're generally in a smaller tank physically, because you've cut a person out and what they need, space wise, you kind of pay for it in the fact that it's not a high speed system for putting shells downrange. And I guess that's another point here is the M1 is a fairly sizable tank. If you ever see the drawings of an M1 and a T80 next to each other,
Far
the
taller.
T8
Yeah.
top of the T80's turret barely clears the top of the hull on the M1. The M1 is a much larger tank physically, and that does make it a little easier to spot unless it's really well hauled down. Makes the Warsaw Pact tanks a little tougher to see, from an optical standpoint. Sadly, it doesn't do much for your thermal presence. You're a little smaller, but hot is hot. So if you've got your engine running, or you've recently fired a shell or something, or a gun, those things are going to stand out at distance on a thermal sight.
I mean, too, it also speaks to the difference in design philosophies. The
Yes.
Soviet tanks are famous for having horrible gun depression, but they, on balance, I don't think they consider that to be important because Soviet tank design has almost always been focused on the offense. Whereas the M1, if you want to use an M1 as a fire, your fire brigade, get them into a hold down position and quickly plug a gap or quickly, redeploy to capture the Soviets while they're in the open. They're fantastic at that. With the T80s though, those are attacking tanks. Those are meant to go forwards. With how those are designed. But the M1s can do
and
that too, of course.
and you're correct about design philosophy. Soviet philosophy becomes very simple, and it's been that way since World War II. Coming out of the 40s, is I want a lot of them. I want them to be simple. Most of the controls, if you can drive, if you can drive a T-34, yeah, you can probably drive a T-80, because the control mechanism and the systems really haven't changed. Um, we chose the 80s because that is I'll say, probably the high point in technology transition for both NATO and the Warsaw Pact. NATO, probably 1980 and before, or even 83 and before, when you're looking at M60s and M113s, the kind of that, I'll say, post World War II design philosophy of let's kind of put a gun on it, give it some armor. American tanks and maybe NATO tanks generally larger, and we went for the quality over quantity run. We'll have better optics, we'll have better guns, better ammunition, better training, better sensors, but that also runs with it larger price tag. You have to train people to use them. You generally can't hop from like an M60 into an M1 and immediately do everything. You might be able to start it. You can probably drive it because there's similar mechanism in control. But when you go back to the gunner area and the sights are different, and the ballistic computer is different, and everything about it, you have to train. And I know if Jeff was here, he talked to that aspect because he was a master gunner for Bradley's. You have to go learn these systems, learn what they can do when the stuff works, learn what they do when systems don't work. If you got to switch from your computer sight and ballistic computers, back to reading the reticle and going back to just good old gunfire methods, you have to have that training. The Soviet era tanks, um, one thing from doing a lot of the data work over the past, I don't know, 15 odd years here, is looking at a lot of how, I'll say, Eastern and Western tank philosophy varied. When you look at, especially the Russian philosophy from the 40s up to now, is there's been a very steady progression of improvement of equipment. And you can just you can map it, and I did. I've got data tables and 3D plots, but it's got this relatively smooth, uh, ramp up in armor capacity and protection, and their guns go up over time. Everything is in a very smooth line. It's just like every couple of years, here's a little bit better armor. We make a new tank, it's better, and here's a bigger gun and a new tank, and it's better. NATO, on the other hand, and kind of the Western philosophy is, I'm going to ride this piece of equipment till it's no longer viable, and then we're going to dump a new system. So they're very much a step function. It's like they start out better than the Russian equipment. Then over the next 10, 15 years, the Russians on their steady line, punch through and get better. And then all of a sudden, NATO goes up, step shift. We need a new set of tanks and new capabilities. They get better than the Russians, and then over time, the Russians keep that ramp, and it's very very much a cyclical improvement on the NATO side, and you see that in the 80s. Um, at the start of the 80s, the Russians are starting to cut through and be better equipped. So if you're dealing with this Cold War, say in the 80s, and maybe up to about 83 or so, maybe 75 to 83. Russians have an advantage. Their tank armor is better. Their guns are better. Now their electronics and fire control may not be as great, but on our end, our tanks aren't as good. We can't. M60 is not going to stand up well to a 115 AP round, let alone a 125. The 105 millimeter gun becomes almost completely ineffective against the T-72s of the early to mid 80s, especially when you get into some of the, I'll say, a second and third generation T-72 builds where they really up armored the front end. 105s just aren't going to really penetrate. So you're in a bad way. You're still relying on infrared sights because the thermals really haven't made it there yet. But over a span of a couple years, the M60s are getting phased out for the new M1. Very quickly, the M1 gets upgunned and up armored because the initial M1 with the 105, and I'll say kind of its initial armor, is kind of on par with when the Soviets dropped the T-80s. Um, in fact, probably the 80s got a basic advantage for kill capability at range at the start of that. But once you start getting into the improved M1 and then the M1A1 with the 120, the scale tips. And then, of course, we were talking the 113s. You go away from an APC to the Bradley. You're bringing in a chain gun. You're bringing in tow missiles, thermal sights, commander sight, better armor. Now you've got an IFV that's on par and technically better than the BMPs. The BMPs will definitely just slaughter 113s. Out to probably 2 to 3 kilometers, especially with ATGMs. But especially when you get to a BMP2 with its 30 millimeter autocannon, 113 there's no match there. A 50 cal on the 113 is just not going to win that fight.
can
That's
say
a
hello.
self-protection gun.
Can say hello to a helicopter with that, but you're not gonna. Maybe shoot up trucks if you're lucky, but
It's basically self-protection. It's for that whoops, I drove into the enemy, and while I'm trying to run away, I can at least lay down suppressing fire. Yeah,
Yep.
it's not meant to go toe-to-toe with anything.
hmm,
Hopefully get the
Yeah,
guy with the RPG to duck instead of shoot.
yeah. Uh, I have to
exactly.
say that transition you're talking about there, though, with NATO adopting that higher tech equipment in the 80s. There's another Matrix title, Combat Mission Cold War, that is set in 79 and 81, and you have different versions of campaigns in that one that show you that transition. And so Flashpoint campaigns is right at the tail end of that. Arguably, I'd say when NATO's tech supremacy is really starting to show far stronger than any other period because let's take Dragon for example. Dragon's not the most impressive ATGM system, but every American rifle squad has a Dragon by this point. That's a lot of ATGMs. You've got proliferation of tows. You've got the M113s now with the that elevatable tow launcher. I forget the exact name of it.
That's the M901, the ITO. Yeah, it's
Yes, the ITOs.
Which I
and
do
it's
You
have a
have a
couple of
couple.
units
Yeah.
of in this scenario.
I've known I know those ones from this scenario just because it makes it almost impossible for the Soviets to counterattack effectively. Because if they're being held back in reserve, you can't really do a counterstroke to give NATO a bloody nose because it's you have to be very deliberate about taking those on.
Yeah, well, and again, that particular platform is an evolution. You get the tow launcher on the M113 or the M150 is what that's called, where it's a tow launcher that's basically mounted on the roof of an M113. But the tow has some thermal sight on it. The 113 itself is night vision and other things. So that gunner can try to hunt for targets, but it's the field of view is narrow. It's not as good as say having a full thermal sight system like you're going to get on a Bradley or an M1, where you've got that and maybe a commander's sight as well, hunting for the targets. Now you switch over and evolve to the M901. For starters, you're putting it on that elevating head where it's a kind of a mast-mounted sight and weapon system. So now I can hide my vehicle either behind a hill, dig it into a pit, and I can raise that hammerhead up. It's got very nice thermal and optic capability, and now I've got a two-tube tow launcher attached to it. So that thing kind of pops up, looks, goes, yep, there's the tank, bang, kills it. Drop the head, you can go back out to another position. Yeah, they may never see what kills them with a system like that. Now, if you sit there too long and keep firing and get noticed, you're just a 113 with a box on top, and artillery will kill you, or a helicopter, or an airstrike. Um, not again, not invincible by any means, but it's definitely a great weapon system to put in cover, on a hill, overlooking a decent approach lane, and you can just light things up for days with them.
So we've got the ITHOs as an example, and this episode's ostensibly on armor. We can cover other
Yeah.
stuff too, but armor is the big key thrust. And for the Cold War battlefield, especially at this point, almost I talked about this with SgtZdog a little while back. Almost everything on the battlefield is in some way related to armor in terms of can I survive getting hit by armor or mitigate damage, or can I kill it? So what do I mean by that is like the Soviets have RPG-7s in attached to damn near everything. Every rifle squad's going to have an RPG-7. All the recon teams have RPG-7s. There's ATGMs mounted on every IFV. Helicopters are equipped with ATGMs. So there's an immense amount of resources dedicated towards killing tanks. And so you think, I think sometimes when you play this game, tanks feel fragile, but they only feel fragile because so much national resources have been dedicated towards developing ways to kill tanks because they're such a threat. If they actually manage to achieve that exploitation and start shooting up your rear areas, it's such a nightmare to deal with them.
Yeah, and it again, it goes to the, you know, the tank is the, I don't know, it's the quintessential battle piece on the field, you know, when it comes to being able to eliminate the enemy. Um, you know, if you don't have, you know, either more tanks, better tanks, or like you said, a proliferation of, you know, ATGMs or RPGs that you can get close enough to use, because again, that becomes an issue. And when you start talking about that protection capability of the tank, you come from the 60s and 70s where it's basically I'm, you know, all metal. You know, it's a steel, you know, cast or welded construction, and that's it. So if I want to be more protected, I just keep slapping thicker and thicker, you know, metal on it, in hopes that I can deflect or stop the shell, or you know, there's enough thickness that the jet of a heat round can't cut through it. You pull into the 70s, late 70s into the 80s. You know, the Russians are kind of first with going into this composite armor mode, which is we're going to not only have metal, we're going to use, you know, spaced armors and rubber and you know, sand basically, and some other materials to now mitigate both armor piercing and heat round. And for less weight, I start to get more protection. You know, NATO picks up on that pretty quick, of course. We got some enemy activity already.
Oh yeah, recon screen. Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
there's a couple of recon units end up real far forward here, which would be more dangerous if the enemy had more artillery, but it's not like they have none, so like them getting any eyes on you can still be pretty painful for just almost no reason.
Ooh, it looks like you guys might be driving through a minefield.
I don't think we're hitting any mines yet. They should be kind of carefully navigating around them. Oh no, you're right, they are. There's mines popped up here. Yeah, hopefully we don't take many, if any, casualties to those. We should see my scouts hopefully dismount real soon here too.
Yeah. So yeah, you're dealing with two separate battalions for NATO, so you've got a pretty long OODA loop, at least compared to what the Soviets have right now.
Yeah, this is one of the few scenarios where NATO ends up with a longer OODA loop than Warsaw Pact does.
Yeah, and that can definitely happen based on electronic warfare, command structure, you know, readiness levels, training levels. You can get into those situations.
Which I mean is very true in this
This,
situation. You've got two battalions. He's, you know, Soviet commander's only got a single one, so you know.
yeah,
you
he's
don't-
got very smaller units, so that's going to be quicker. Yep.
So looking at your pathing, I'm guessing that on the western approach, you want to get your tanks up on that ridge line to try to provide fire support, but your main effort is really coming from the south and east.
Yep. Yeah, so there's one tank company is gonna shoot for this ridge line to kind of provide some fire support.
Whoa, Tunguska's.
Yeah, there's two Igla teams here. It's just like, but also these helicopters, they go away in 102 minutes. It's like 2 hours after the first scenario, so it's like you use them or
Went
lose
away a
them.
lot faster than that.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those like, if you kind of like peek behind the curtain, this is a scenario where there's not really anything for those helicopters to do because there's the two Igla teams and the Tunguska, and all of the enemy is here. So there's just nothing for that helicopter flight to do, really, other than get shot down by the large amount of Soviet air defense. I mean, you can kind of use them to try and hunt the enemy recon, but the problem is those recon units are so small, it's really hard for those helicopters to actually see anything.
I think the Soviets got armor on the way, so maybe interdiction if you were really like clever about how you deployed them.
Yeah, you can kind of do a little bit of that. Part of the problem is that the Soviet, or I'm sorry, the Apaches that you have rockets and not ATGMs.
That hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they actually end up not able to do much other than hit the enemy FARP. Like that's about all they can really do. And so it's just like, oh, okay.
It gets kind of rough to close them up to hit the city or something.
Yeah, it's
Especially with the 2S6 sitting in there.
oh, okay. Knocking out two of these three conkers is amazing.
Yeah, you're already pretty close to them.
And there's the
For
third one. That
yeah.
that is a huge victory, especially if we can knock out this last rifle squad that or scout squad that they're sitting on top of.
All right, 32 minutes in. I think you can save that unit from driving into a minefield. The one west of Steinfeld.
Uh, Here,
Yeah, because it
yeah.
looks like
I mean, honestly, this is the really. It's not my big HQ. It's one of my two battalion HQs, and if they do suffer casualties, I don't really care. It's one of those things like. Now, actually, you know what? We can even just do not there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I can just do that. And that might kind of bork how long it takes to get here, but honestly, it's not in a rush, so I don't really care that it's going to take forever that it might take forever to do that movement now.
yeah.
This guy can just move hasty all the way to like here, and then I might actually put him like on counter battery for now, and we'll put him on call and do some smoke later on. Um, But if I get him up, and actually he probably doesn't even need to be quite that far. If I just move to like here to save a few minutes. Yeah, so
Yeah, that's plenty of range.
um, obviously I know because I've played this scenario that the enemy battery is here, um, or at least under at least one of the battle plans is here. I think it's probably there in all of them. Realistically speaking, knowing that they only have three rifle companies, to defend that battery. It could also be here. Uh, they could have also like held back some stuff back here and then put it like here. So like those I think would all be good locations for that battery. So like as long as I'm in range of those areas, we're okay. And I mean, even here is that and more. So that's more than close enough. I could probably, if I really wanted, even put him like as far back as here. Yeah, that would probably be okay. But I'm gonna go ahead and move him all the way up just to make sure he's in range. This is the mortar HQ. He's gonna just move up to be right next to him. I admit I don't actually like that this HQ is a separate unit. But such is life. And then we have our other second highest HQ that just needs to be, oops, like up there. Didn't really mean to do it that way. There we go. And let's put him a little further into the forest. But again, we're not actually even really in that big a rush to get there. But so yeah, I started this up with just 3 suppression barrages, which I think we got pretty good results out of that. If I look at the staff report, 15 APCs, 15 infantry, an AT, and 3 HQs. Not bad for some blind fire on where we suspect enemies to be. Oh, it's actually still finishing up one of those suppression barrages. Um, but yeah, we're off to a pretty good start. This is, I think, going a lot better than the last time I played this scenario so far. So
So
far, we're still really early.
so you've got 3 companies of Abrams. You got most of them. I'm guessing you're setting them up to support the infantry
Yeah,
attack. You're not
right. Yeah,
actually
you were
sending
asking
Abrams
about
in.
that. So I've got the one company going here. The other company is kind of in this area to shoot here. And unfortunately, that's about all you actually have good line of sight at any sort of range to the objective and where the enemies are probably going to be. So I've just got the other company just kind of going back here hunting anything that might be back here. Um, realistically, I know it's just the FARP and maybe an HQ or two. Um, but if this were any other scenario, I'd probably want to have it go back here hunting other artillery batteries that might be back here. If there was a second AD unit that was reserved for back here, that sort of thing. Having it back here, patrolling around, looking for targets. And then if I need it to come back, I can still, because it's taking those orders much earlier than the actual assault on this objective, I can change that and have it come and help assault this objective.
So that's in game and IRL. That is kind of one of the advantages of tanks, isn't it? That they can be rather responsive. Whereas infantry, they
Oh,
have
yeah.
to get briefed. They have to get back into their carriers. They have to leave all their fixed fortifications. Pick up all their stuff and reload it.
And they can move quickly while shooting. Because, like, that's one of those things where, like, you can see my recon units, in order to be able to move stealthily, they have to dismount way before they get to their final endpoint. All of our line units that are assaulting the objectives, they're doing a similar thing. They have to dismount, 1.5 kilometers or more before they get to that final endpoint. Tanks don't have to do a dismount and suffer slower movement while they move on their last objective. They're fully functional all the way to the end. Oh, come on, guys, kill this. It's 2 guys. Actually, I think it might be 3 in the Warsaw Pact scout team.
Well, that gets back to the famous question, we try to kill this guy forever. Now, that's a wooded hex.
Oh, yeah.
3 guys who, at this point, have probably gone to ground. They're not shooting or moving. You could almost run them over and not see them, even with a thermal sight.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just no good way to do it.
Now here we have a bit of the tank's natural enemy, though, off on your right.
Yes, the
potentially dangerous.
helicopter.
Yes.
Got some Hinds.
Yeah, some Hinds. We did get 1 ATGM missile from this hex onto one of our tanks, which is, I guess I missed the orders on it, and they're going way ahead of schedule. I'm actually kind of okay with this helicopter hunting my recon, because my air defense is not in position yet. And so that means he's hunting something that's not my own line troops.
No, it's not something that you can really rely upon, but most tanks do have anti-aircraft machine guns mounted on them. So,
Yes.
you approach an Abrams company on the road, and there's a lot of 50 cals turning your way, but it's not something you really want to rely on to reliably take down gunships.
Yeah, because if Mike was here, or Jeff was here, sorry, if Jeff was here, he'd say, yeah, that's not air defense.
Yeah.
And we had to make some adjustments in the game model for some of that, which is, the ability to hit a moving target at that size and speed.
There we go. Hey,
the only time
kicked
had a
off.
SAM off on it. Nice.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah, crossing shots are about impossible with a manual weapon system like that. So we actually went in and changed it now that if the helicopter's not basically coming at you directly, you're not going to get a shot off.
Yeah.
And even the shot coming at them is, marginal at best. So yeah, air defense systems are there for a reason. It's tough. Stinger teams are great. Yeah, 2S6, you're really doing well. West German Gepard system with its radar and gun. Now, those are dangerous systems. Interesting thing there, and again, I know we're trying to focus armor, but U.S. Air defense capability for like ground systems is poor, and it's poor through the 80s, and it never really gets much better. The only thing they did that was of any plus was the Stinger, replaced the Red Eye. And yeah, because when you look at like the Vulcan, an M163 platform, you put a Vulcan on a 113 chassis. It's got a search radar, not even a targeting radar. So it tells you, hey, something's that direction, but the poor guy with the gun still has to put a sight on it and shoot.
Yeah, you
You know,
got you got
not enough.
you got VADS, you got
Hey.
Chaparral, but I don't think what is it? Chaparral isn't meant to. I don't think that's meant to stay up with the company, is it? That's meant to be more
Well,
like.
it was supposed to be, a tracked, air defense missile. The problem with the Chaparral, kind of the same thing. One, no real radar on it, so it's not detecting. The early Chaparrals, until about, I don't know what it was, 87, 88, had to have a rear aspect lock on a hard target. So after the aircraft dropped the bombs on you and is running away and going by, you might be able to lock them up because it's a rear aspect Sidewinder missile on that device. So again, not the best. Now they went all aspect late 80s, but then again, you got to see them coming. So if it's not got an air search radar attached to it, directing it's tough. You've either got to have a decent line of sight, which if you look at this map is not an easy thing to get,
No,
even
no.
dealing with a low flying aircraft, let alone a helicopter. It's just it's poor. And the reason was the U.S. expected the U.S. Air Force, to dominate and own the skies. Great on paper. I don't know how great it is in practice.
Yeah, they're really slacking on the job today.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to worry about
you
fixed
know,
wings in this scenario, but yeah, gunships are a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and
and
that's definitely it, like you can definitely tell that they didn't have access to these really good simulations like this 40, 50 years ago because they would have gone, oh, we need more air defense,
Well, I think
organic, and it needs to be mobilized. It can't just be manpads like the Stinger.
I think that
the U.S. is doing that again now with the drone war.
Oh yeah,
Is we fell way behind, and everybody's like, oh well, I got to deal with something that is the size of a trash can or smaller, and there could be dozens of them coming at me.
I think the Americans probably did try with air defenses, and that was the Sergeant York program. And there's some funny anecdotes about that program and why that didn't go so well.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, that was, it couldn't hit a stationary target at like 2 or 3 kilometers. It quite honestly couldn't hit the broadside of a barn door. That didn't bode well. Second problem with it was so heavy and so cumbersome that it couldn't keep up with the M1s or the Bradleys on the move. So an air defense system that slows your entire force down, not stellar to want to work with either.
yeah.
And being Americans, we refuse to look at and or buy anything not invented here. It's the NIH syndrome, not invented here.
Because
We're not going to
seems
buy
like
parts.
yeah, that seems like a good option, honestly, from
Well,
what I see of like the 70s and 80s.
Here's another unit I didn't get the delays set
Uh-oh.
right on. Both of these ATGM units, which fortunately aren't doing like the full assault, but they're going way further ahead than they should be. Hopefully.
Again, people talk about friction, in battle, and that's exactly what this is.
Yeah.
Some orders didn't get properly dispersed. Now, you as a player, you can beat yourself up and go, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that." I don't know if you just lost a tank to an ATGM.
I just
or
lost
not.
2 tanks to the Heinz, yeah. And the best case scenario I can hope for right now, because I've got, and there's,
Whoa.
ooh, painful.
Yeah.
Best case scenario I can hope for here is that those tanks track down and can wipe out the FARP here. Because we've got this air defense unit is currently it's right. So it's like one Stinger team, right? So they've got 4 missiles. So I'd have to hit. Okay, it looks like I did shoot down one of the 4 that
Yeah, your
were in
senior team
this.
earlier
So
that lost their Jeep.
I
I
would
think they had
need
their Jeep shot out.
75% accuracy, which ain't gonna happen, to knock down all these helicopters. And these guys would have to not be moving. Right now, though, they're currently set to be moving. And my other Stinger team, which is
Well, it's your turn,
here,
isn't it? It's your turn, isn't it? You
it
could tell them to
is
stop.
my turn. I could tell them to stop here. And that let's see. So the thing is, yeah, I think we will do
Well,
that.
do they see the helicopter? That'd be my first
Oh,
question.
that would be a good thing to check. Yes, one enemy unit spotted, which has to be the helicopter, right?
Okay. Yep.
um, oh well, I guess I can actually just look here at the active contact since I went over to the staff tab.
Yep. Because
Um,
somebody spotted a helicopter or artillery unit kind of in the rear
yeah,
for a brief second. It was probably one of the 901s when it was on the hill.
I think it was just because it was the artillery lighting up, which it looks like we did hit one of the enemy platforms. Bit of a
Yeah,
cheeky
this guy
peek
was
behind the
over
curtain. Oh yeah, there was
over.
something like over here
Yeah, so
somewhere.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can go to the
Probably
intel
just
screen and look.
radio traffic giving it to us, because that's probably their
Possibly.
HQ. I think that's enemy sit rep, and then we have an unknown radar only at 2305. Oh, that might be
305, that's got to be
2305.
what,
Oh, that's
2S6?
here.
It's a
Ah,
2S6.
2305 was the artillery. Um, we've got 3511 as the helo.
It might have been an
I don't see
unconfirmed
it
helo
here.
report because I think they did fly back
Yeah,
to the FARP. I think they flew back to the FARP and then came back. So I
Oh,
think
that could be.
yeah, it
it
must
might
have
have
been
been
the
just a.
helo because we don't. That's the only thing we've got, and it should be this. So if I click the hex here, it's there. I know we did see something up here. Might have been the helo. Might have been radio transmission from the FARP or an HQ or something. You're just going to there. That's fine. Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, these guys can snipe at least one or two more of these guys.
Hmm.
Um, and other than
So
that, go ahead.
so your armor is like really letting you control most of the field outside of your objective, but that complex terrain, there's dug in BMP infantry there, so
Yeah,
armor's keeping well away from that because you don't want to drive your tanks into complex terrain held by infantry because that is just a recipe to get RPG sevens every which way massed volley attacks and
Yep.
lose whole
Oh,
companies.
and flank shots, rear shots, top shots.
yeah,
And once you get basically adjacent to an enemy unit like that, you start to take flank. And if you actually end up in a hex with them, they can hit you from pretty much any side, generally getting top and rear shots. Which an M1 is great. You can probably take an RPG to the face, but it'll punch through the side, top, and rear, pretty much every time
And
and do damage enough to knock you out.
it's the nice thing about Command 2 or sorry, not Command, Flashpoint campaigns is the fact that there's a distinction in sort of after action reports between units that were just disabled and units that were catastrophically
You
killed.
got one.
got one of them.
Um,
There we go.
yeah, nice.
Oh,
Because
two,
it does.
maybe? Not sure.
Oh, and you still got Reiki teams running around in your.
Oh, now they're gonna be. He's got one more launch, I think. No, that's all four launches.
Whoa,
I don't. What unit is this?
I think it's a captain.
I had their
Yeah,
shots and running away.
I'm not just.
Oh,
I see the captain. I don't know.
follow
Which
the
one.
helicopters. You can find out their FARPs somewhere around.
Hey, there it is.
Call. Yeah, there you go.
So he's gonna follow his SOP and not move closer, but uh, now that we've identified that, if nothing else, oop,
Calling the Cobras. Yeah.
yeah, we can send our own units up. Oh, okay, there we go, and he did move into that, and he'll be able to take this under fire. The kicker here is that FARPs do come with their own
Igla teams.
AD,
Yes. Yeah.
so um, ideally. So these things are going to be basically harmless to our tanks here. So I'm going to like send this guy just in a hasty order down to there and just tell him screen. Um,
Yeah, you still got to respect that there could be RPGs with some of the infantry in there.
So I don't think the FARPs ever have that. Oh, well, okay, so it does have, that was one BMP in that
There
list.
could be some command
It's
vehicles.
a
There could
BTR
be
40. Oh no,
Yeah,
BMP KSH. I
BMP
think that's
KSH, and then
that's
some
command
trucks and a couple
BMP
of
though.
BTRs. So we'll do a move deliberate then. But I am just
The
gonna
other
have him
option is
screen at
too.
the end.
Can your 155s reach it?
So I think that's just out of reach. Yeah, it's just out of reach, which I think is very deliberate on behalf of the scenario
a.
designer. How's it going, Tyrannofex? I'm afraid across all of the slew of names, I don't remember you. And I would have some tea. Oh, I actually have some tea left. I can have more.
I've got tea, so I'll take a sip.
U.S. Army helicopter pilots hate Brigadier Rodriguez. They do. They do. You're right, Major L. Vega. They do hate me. Especially because I'm just like, yeah, go for it, helicopters. Go do the thing. Um,
Brigadier General Rodriguez does not roleplay force preservation.
yeah. Let's see. I'm going to have my helicopters do a hunt, like up to here, I think, and
Ooh,
we'll
that's
see.
still going to be exposed to the Tunguskas. Those things can punch out far with those missiles that they got.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that yeah, 2S6 can hit you about what four clicks with the guns, and I want to say 16
I'm gonna
with the
set.
missiles.
Let's see.
Yeah, maybe
I want to
18.
set
Yeah,
acceptable losses are minimal, down from
yeah.
substantial. Not that that's likely to make a difference, but we can try. Your standoff is going to be at least 3 hexes.
I have to say, when you're playing the Soviets and you have some Tunguskas with you, you feel that security that comes with having them.
Oh yeah,
It gives you a
It's
lot of
it's
confidence.
they're
yeah,
amazing.
it's a very good system for the 80s, late 80s. Um, Mainly because you've got a decent missile system, fairly accurate in terms of that missile. It's got decent coverage for this kind of battle space. With that 16 to 18 kilometer reach. Got a decent air search radar on it. So it's kind of blending a Japard for the gun system. With maybe I don't remember what the British Rapier system. You've got a decent missile system. So definitely a lot better than say having a Zoo 234
Oh, yeah.
or an SA9 or SA8 system sitting around.
I'm gonna move this guy just over to that hex instead.
So you're 2 hours in, not quite nightfall yet. When do you think you want the infantry to go in?
So I have the infantry set up to do their final assaults if the timings still work. Okay, yeah, and it looks like just as things get delayed, this is one of those things where I would like to change the game so that we have it so that you delay to a time, not delay for an amount of time. Because you can see these guys, they're going to do their final assault right at full dark. These guys, they're currently set to wait a little longer just because they got a little bit delayed getting into their current position. At
Well, the
least the
nice
whole company will go together. We can look and see. Yeah, again, this whole company is going to go all together just right at full dark. And then there's the third company here. Yes, we're going to assault. Not quite all together. This unit's going to go a little ahead, but they're at least not the ones that are assaulting the objective point itself. So not the end of the world that they go a little early. But again, a little after. So the idea is I want to do the assault not while we're in that dusk period. Wait until
Mm-hmm.
after the
Mm-hmm.
dusk, we get to the full night, so that the thermal sights on all of our Abrams don't work against us.
Right.
And you haven't taken any ATGM fire from Watsendorf when you're crossing that ground, so I don't think there's any Soviet troops there. So I think the whole battalion is probably concentrated right on those crossroads physically.
Yes, yeah.
Because otherwise, if there had been a BMP company in that town, you would have known. You would have
Well,
felt it.
and so we can kind of see
Ah, yes,
based
there
on
they
all the
are. Yes.
casualties that our suppression barrages did. Because what I did was I went suppression barrage here, 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 and then 4, 5, 6 for a second round. So that cooked off all of the M109 ammo that we started with, except for the smoke rounds.
Yeah.
But that was just all the artillery right there. Um, and so that kind of got that going and softened these guys up. That battery, I think they're still rearming. Oh no, they're back. They're on call now. But I'm not going to issue any more fire missions until a little bit longer, and then we'll probably do a suppression barrage, probably on this hex here. Just because this hex, if I turn our victory markers back on, um, so the enemy units are here, here, and here. These two are kind of obvious guesses. Those are well-defended hexes with the terrain and and trees and buildings. This hex is open, so you know the enemy's probably not on this hex. They're on one of these three. And if you got to pick one, you want to be on the one that's in front of it. So that's why we guess this one for our barrage. Um, but this one in particular, it's the one on point. So if I can control this, I have a good launch point to take the other two if I need to push past this one. But also, if there's still a unit here, they'll put pressure on my guys that try to take these two. So I really want to suppress this one. So I'll probably have
Mm.
the M109 barrage. Um, I'm not going to bother doing a neutralize. I want to keep the enemy readiness down because what's going to do most of the killing is all of the machine guns and stuff that I have once they get here and assault into this at the end. And then just lean on our tanks to kind of provide the supporting fire needed. Um, and then I'll probably have the mortar. It'll probably do a similar thing. I might have it because these mortar units, I really love them. You've got so much ammunition in these things. I'll probably just issue really long neutralization barrages on these objectives, um, and just do both of them and just let it go for a long time. And when our guys finally move into these hexes, that'll just automatically cancel out those barrages, and those artillery units will fall back to their next barrage order.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like for some people that maybe have played some other titles before, mortar's a little, I don't want to say misleading, but those are 107 millimeter mortars. Those are chunky rounds they're firing. These aren't 81s. These aren't 60s. These are
Yeah.
proper heavy mortars. Well,
Yeah, that
not
is
quite
the
heavy,
nice.
but
Yeah, they're not heavy. They're like a medium mortar, but uh, the size of the battery at 6 tubes and the fact that you've got a lot of ammo in it really encourages you to just put a lot of ammo out because the mortars fire so quick. That is one of
mm-hmm.
the nice things about the U.S. Rifle battalions is they've got these batteries. Um, Anybody who's already been playing the game, hopefully they played at least tutorial 2, if not 1, 2, and 3, or whatever. They're familiar with the smaller 2-tube battery that the cavalry gets, and I think that's a pair of 81 millimeter mortars. Is that right, Jim?
I think so. I'd have to go back and
Yeah,
look, but
I think
that
it's
sounds
two
about
81
right.
millimeter mortars, so it doesn't do a whole lot. It's like enough to do some suppression and some smoke, but it's not going to do a lot of damage. But this battery is not that battery. This thing will do some real work for you. Um, so we're going to have it do some work. We're going to kind of section off the battlefield a little bit here and place smoke in these 3 hexes. Not this OODA loop, but the next one. We'll place smoke in these 3 hexes, and that'll keep the enemy company that's in this one from shooting at our own rifle company that's assaulting this objective.
So I think this showed up for back. This was months ago now. The live stream too, and we saw it a bit here too. Not quite as strongly though. When it comes to leading an advance, you really need those tanks. They're really important to actually lead the axis of advance. BMPs can kind of do it on their own, although that's still pretty risky.
They can do it,
what
but you're going to take a lot of casualties.
Yeah, and M113s just can't do it. They just do not have the organic firepower to independently lead an advance. Whereas here, though, with three separate companies of Abrams tanks, you can pretty much pick 3 separate axes of advance and do reasonably well in each one with the level of firepower they have. And I mean, in this case, you've got one company running around in the back line. There's not a lot of Soviet assets to hit, but you're hitting them. They're FARP, and then you've got beautiful supporting fields of fire that those 120s are going to provide for when the infantry assault goes in. But I think it's also crucial too to point out to any new players: don't actually drive those tanks in to capture the objective. That's not what they should be doing.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit with when we were talking about. Oh wow, there's that Tunguska fire that Jim was talking about. But hey, we did get our helicopter managed to get in and snipe that last scout unit.
Yeah, a lot of getting away with running deep like that is dead recon, which is important. And like you noted at the start, there's not a lot of artillery support on the red side, which is atypical. Usually red's got a lot of artillery on or off map, and if they spot you, it starts to rain.
Oh, come on.
So things
Yes!
like these tanks in the north, you kind of get beat up on.
There we go. There's the last Russian helicopter. Okay.
Yeah, they're done. I think
that's for people who complain that the SAMs never hit anything. That was a good use of stingers.
Yeah.
And I think what people get stuck on, you got to be careful. If you drop your stinger team in the middle and surround it with forest or city, it can't see out. It's got the same problem.
Yeah.
It's got to have line of sight. Here you get lucky that they're on the edge, they're on a hill, and the enemy was crossing on a kind of a higher hill, giving you a line of sight. And that's, they're going to die pretty quick trying to make that move. Now you're definitely at dusk. You're at 55% illumination now.
Yeah, 55% and falling fast. We've got 31 more minutes of dusk, and then it'll be full night. It is clear, so our tanks don't have full advantage, but...
Yeah, just for players, do a line of sight check from an Abrams and like the 901 and then the infantry.
Yeah.
To kind of show some of the difference in what I can see. Now that guy's got terrain.
Yeah, so
blocking him.
Let me turn off that. So you can see this tank, once he gets here into the city, he's still going to have, at least right now, he's got pretty decent vision. But if I were to say, do that same check here, it's not really any better at the moment while we're still got some daylight. Let's see, 43, 62, 21, 13. So you can see the Abrams is just a little bit better, not a whole lot better, but a little bit better right now while we're in dusk. But once we see that go another half an hour, posture check, yeah, that's fair. That's going to change a lot.
Yeah, and more important, it's going to change for the infantry guys because their ability to see is dropping like a stone.
Yeah. Now the infantry for both sides have night vision limited, so they're gonna do okay
again,
for engaging each other, but that's about it.
Unless illumination goes completely flat.
Yeah. You can definitely see how this scout
not.
section, which I think has slightly better night vision gear. Nope, they're also night vision limited. But like, doesn't take getting very far, and they can't see much. Um,
It's a interesting thing. It's 1989, so it's you've got some pretty modern tech there, but it's not like 2003 where there's like thermals everywhere, where infantry units can just be issued with thermal optics. It's not really happening very
Okay.
much at this
Oh,
point.
and both sides have it, and now there's the introduction of thermally and multispectral smoke to be blocking things because of course a thermal sight will regular smoke doesn't bother it; it'll see through it. They do to get we do model it being degraded dawn and dusk, thermal inversion time. If it's raining, they degrade. It doesn't eliminate them. Somebody had brought that up on one of the forums, and it's like you'll still, even in a decent rain, a thermal sight will still pick up a hot target in the distance.
yep,
Again, because while the rain is there and causes problems, it's not 100% debilitating to a thermal. Definitely degrades it. We look at that, degrades radar, and we take that into account as well.
yep,
So with the weather influences the battle. You really got to be careful and keep an eye on time of day, cloud ceiling if it's foggy. That little cloud up the upper right of the setup right now has no meters. It's a clear day. But if that says like, 60 meters or 50 meters, you're in fog. You've got a low cloud deck. Uh, Tough to see, aircraft coming in. Tough to fly things in bad weather like that.
Now,
And
one of the
we
nice
take that into account.
one of the nice things too for this assault is it doesn't look like it's too windy out right now, so that smoke is going to stick around for a bit.
yep.
That's also true.
And that'll help us a lot here. May actually need to. We'll see how well the push on these two objectives go, but like I may need to take this platoon of tanks and bring it around to Watsendorf here to help shoot on this objective. But we'll see how that all goes. Um, so I've got my smoke barrage laid down. That'll go down well in it. Actually, yeah, right up until. Ooh, do I need to? Okay, so actually, that's gonna go longer by a minute than how long I can do this. So what we're gonna actually do here, we're gonna reissue those. Then I'm gonna say then that and that. And then, as I was saying, I want these are actually going to be our big long neutralization barrages. Um, so we've got lots of ammo. So we're gonna do that. Set at 95 rounds for each of these missions. And I'm gonna say it's gonna be like 10 minutes. I wonder if I can shorten how long it takes to get the smoke down here. That might actually be the better way to do this. Let's say put the smoke down faster. Barrage smoke here, here, here. Let's just instead change how quickly we put the smoke out. That way they'll get done before the OODA loop ends. On call 2213. Oh, there we go. 2155. Ample margin there, which is what we're looking for. Might be a bit of a stretch putting 40 rounds through 6 tubes in 2 minutes. Maybe if you're prepped for it, I guess.
You got 6 tubes, and that helps. So
Yeah. All right. So we'll let them put that smoke out. And the next turn we'll lay down those real heavy neutralization barrages on these objectives.
Yep, just to kind of step back to talking on the tank since we're trying to focus armor. Yeah, when you look at a subunit inspector, we rate, the armor, front and hull, front side, top, rear, and then there's also accountability for how well it does against kinetic rounds and heat rounds, the chemical rounds. So
There's
you'll see that in the split there, the AP and heat value, and that's allocated at like 10 millimeter step. And when it says 46, that's roughly 460 millimeters equivalent. And when we get into these more modern and later tanks with the composite armor, is they can start dealing with a lot more heat damage than they can a kinetic round. When you're looking at that turret front that's 460 kinetic, it's 920 heat. So unless it gets hit with something with a kind of a dual or tandem warhead that can drill deep enough to do damage, that's why from the front a turret hit, something like a stagger, maybe even a spandrel, not going to penetrate. It can still do some damage. You might get a fallout because you get like a weapon, a kill, or systems kill, but it's not going to be a direct kill. Versus hitting like the command vehicle there, which is got 20, 30, 40 millimeters worth of protection.
That's
So we
splendid.
take that into account. The reactive armors are in there. That takes things into account. Different levels of reactive armor from the Warsaw Pact side. The early contact one type stuff, which would stop heat jets all the way into the reliclet, and there's a couple other advanced types in 89, which can actually do damage to long rod penetrators and drop them down where they can't penetrate. So that makes something like a T80 EV, or more importantly, a T80U, kind of dangerous to deal with because your great DU round fired from your M1A1 may not make it through, especially on a frontal hit. So that kind of stuff is modeled in there.
I mean, speaking to that, for Southern Storm, it's mostly, the Army, the American Army that you're dealing with, not the Marines. And so it's a lot of M1A1s, but there's plenty of other NATO forces that are still using older tanks just with 105s. And they
Oh yeah,
probably, the Leopard has spaced armor, but it doesn't have composites. So it's not going to be defeating heat warheads very effectively.
no.
I think AMX is just steel armor. I don't think there's any
Oh yeah,
composite
yeah. The
there.
AMXs are a light tank by comparison. And you'll see that on the NATO side. There's basically, did that go all the way to zero, or is that about 5%?
For
So you got
the
some moonlight to keep your night vision gear going.
we're at
Uh,
40% now. Yeah.
I'm still dropping. Okay.
Yeah,
But to
it'll
go to
it'll
that
drop
armor
for another
question,
couple of minutes. I don't know what it'll end at, but
yeah, looks like you'll have some illumination.
yeah,
But
there'll
to go
be
back to
enough
that,
to keep the illumination going.
yeah. But to that point that Liam was making, when you look at NATO, you definitely have two classes of armor. You have I'll say the early Gen 70s, 60s, 70s post equipment. So that's your M60s for the Americans, your Leo 1s for the West Germans. Um, the Brit tank is going to escape me because Challengers, they're level 2. Chieftains, that's your Chieftains. Canadian forces, they're using Leopard 1s. Belgians, other people. There's a lot of either Leopard 1 or M60s, or even in some cases M48s that can be seen in certain forces on the NATO side. All those earlier tanks, yeah, as we mentioned earlier, you know, not a lot of composite armor, and definitely on I'll say at least on the NATO side, you don't see ERA on those kits. think the Israelis are about the only people that took M60s and other tanks and slapped bricks on them to help out. And like I said, you see a bit of that difference in the Soviet kit getting better, and with the Russians, they very much okay. We got a T-55. Okay, we'll go back now that we've got a T-80, and we'll put on some better, fire control. We can upgun them. We'll slap some of this composite armor ERA kits on them. When you see like the Czech forces in here
So here's
with
your
their
full dark.
T-55s. What do we got there?
Now we're at our full dark, and yeah, it's still 40%
Ah,
illumination.
so you got a lot of illumination. Sweet.
Yeah.
A very bright night with a full moon. That'll help. That should help pretty great. That should give you a good kilometer or so of optical vision.
And this is a big part
But,
of why I wanted to use that smoke to kind of partition this one unit off and keep it from hitting these guys. We've got our tanks. All of those are in position. And that is the nice thing about the thermal sights, of course, is that they can see through this smoke. Because it's not thermally blocking smoke.
And one thing we hope to get put in the game here down the road this year is get illumination rounds going.
Yep.
Something where at night like this, the Soviets and even U.S. and NATO forces would, artillery and mortars to throw up illumination rounds to light up the ground to be able to see things. Especially if this was really dark, no illumination from the moon. You need to throw up some illumination rounds to see anybody, um, like in hex potentially, because again, in any kind of built-up terrain with no ambient light, bad weather, no moon, and without some kind of illumination, you're not seeing anything.
Yeah.
So that's something we want to work on. It's just there's so many hours in a day and so many great things that we want to get in the game that other things have priority right now.
Well, and
We
William and
haven't
I were
forgotten.
actually just talking this week earlier, and that's probably what I'll be working on next. So it's definitely coming.
We got a couple. We have a couple artillery types that need integration.
Yep.
Yep, and illumination is definitely one of them. That requires some UI work because now, even with a dark map, I need to be able to see what's illuminated. So there's some on-map stuff that has to get done. The rounds exist in the system already; they're just suppressed. So turning them on, accounting for them, scenarios have to get them allocated. So yeah, nothing that's going to be out in 2 weeks. But sometime later, this year it'll come up, be a part of it. But then rolling back to the tank discussion, uh, you get the definitely the NATO has those two classes where those next gen tanks, that step shift I talked about that occurred in the mid '80s. U.S. going to the M1, Brits go to Challenger, West Germans go to Leo 2s,
Mm-hmm.
and those tanks, far and away outstrip, what the Russians are putting on the battlefield going into the late '80s. Just the capabilities across the board. You're starting to see very advanced composite armors, the addition of depleted uranium being laid in with the steel and the rubber and everything else, and spacing. A lot of science going into what they call the catch boxes up around the turret. Because when you look at the large turrets on like an M1 or a Leopard or the Challenger, the real turret portion of it is probably about a third of what's there. Most of the structure out in the front part in and around the gun barrel, that's all catch box. That's meant to stop the shell that's coming in or the heat round from actually getting into the turret and workings and the people on the inside and the ammo. Can't really do that too much on the hull you'll start seeing, there's at least, especially these days, a lot more, I'll say, standard um, reactive armor on the sides of a lot of tanks, including, NATO kit, mainly to stand off RPGs and ATGM shots from the side to get into weak points, basically in and around the hull, just above the wheels and below the main deck of the tank, because that's kind of a soft spot. So you'll see
19,
more and more of those with a lot of panels and skirts that go down damn near to the ground.
yeah,
Just
1989.
to stop that.
1989, not so many Tusk kits or anything like that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it basically came from lessons learned dealing with the 90s, dealing with the operation with Desert Storm, and then all the follow-on in the last 20 odd years after that. The RPG shots to the side can knock your tank out pretty quick. So you start seeing, especially pretty much everybody's design now has some kind of skirt with additional space or reactive armor, and an active protection system that started to pop up in the late 80s and really kind of flourished here in the last, I'll say, decade or so, to find active means of engaging, RPG warheads, ATGMs, and even technically these days kinetic rounds. Starts that evolution of the cat and mouse game here in protection. I couldn't do it with armor, so now I'm going to shoot your projectile with my projectile.
Yeah.
Which leads to what we've already seen in an evolution on the modern battlefield, which is, well, then I'll just shoot two projectiles slightly spaced in time, so your system activates against the first one but can't activate against the second. Which is why you'll see a lot of the modern Russian missile launchers are dual tube. They fire both a few milliseconds apart to breach those APS systems. So again, cat and mouse, and somebody will make an APS that, fires not one shell but two shells spaced in time to hit that. It's going to go on and on and on.
There's going to be a constant. There's going to be a constant evolution when it comes to engineering. And there's no real there's a tank round called a silver bullet, but there's no silver bullet that's going to kind of cut through all of these. It's going to be constant evolution in arms races. But I think one of the fundamentals that this game really communicates quite well is it's a multitude of factors, and let's say your tank has really amazing protection systems. Well, if they're out in the open and everybody can see them, it's still going to be all those protection systems are far less effective when they're taking accurate fire consistently. Like the fundamental of being in complex terrain, being hidden, advancing through cover is still really well modeled in this game. As that heat warhead might be able to kill you consistently, but he has to see you and he has to hit you. And at 3 kilometers in complex terrain, it's pretty tricky.
And that's where the difference. A lot of people will say, playing World War II games, where the speed of battle, I'll say, is slower. It's a lot tighter and closer in. It's a paradigm shift when you go to I'll say, a more modern title like this, and you're looking at the Cold War, where if my sensor can find you, I can kill you, and that's out to ranges, 4, 6, 8 kilometers. So if I got my Apache and his Hellfires, I can reach out and touch you at 8 clicks, which is incredible. And by today's standard, that's not much, because I can now do that at 20 or 30 clicks with some of today's weaponry. So the distance are much greater. The sensor capability is important, and that's something in this game system where I've got a question behind me on one of my screens I got to answer is, well, if I've got, one guy trying to spot 10 guys, is that easier than the 10 guys spotting the one guy? And it's like, well, depends. Realistically, it comes down to that sensor duel. My one guy with a very good sensor, like a thermal sensor, may still be able to find your 10 guys in fairly decent, complex terrain because I've got the better sensor and you're a bigger target. Now, I may not see all 10 of you, but if I see a couple of you, I can kill you. Now, the reverse, you got 10 guys with maybe night vision or a less functional sensor trying to locate my one vehicle in cover. You've got more opportunities to find me because you got more guys, but you still have the basic problem that somebody has to see me. It's not a given in this game system. It's a per subunit per sensor type of engagement. So even though you've got 4 tanks and he's got 10 tanks, you know, if you're both in decent terrain and it's decently far apart, nobody may see anybody.
So speaking of nobody's seen
Especially
it, just worth nobody's seen anything. I think there's some T-80s in that town, and they're massacring the infantry attack.
No, it's actually mostly just the rifle company that's still in there.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
All that suppressing fire, and they're still active.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really hard to just flat eliminate a Warsaw Pact company from a hex because it's so large. They can take a lot of casualties and still have a lot of firepower. And you can see they're probably just going to straight up clean up this entire assaulting rifle company, or very close to it. This is one of those, like, it's really hard to get the timings right. It's one of the why I wish we I really want to get us to have the delays be delay until time and not delay for X
like
minutes.
that gets more into some of the
Yeah,
wants Jeff and others have of some kind of control measure because I want X number of units to reach this phase line at this time.
yeah,
So you can get a lot of units on target. Um, and a lot of the problem here is if your infantry doesn't have decent vision system, which they apparently don't because they're not seeing into that hex well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we
You're
could
moving.
see if I turn off
It's
the markers here. There's, I think we stop showing numbers once they get to less than 10%.
yep. And
So
even
there's
though people are
probably
shooting in
something
there,
like 7% because we can see here concealment is 93. So I think there's a 7% visibility. But like, yeah, like I have to roll basically a natural 20 on a D20 die. It's a little bit better than that, but not much.
to see somebody, and it's a case, and this was just on the forums too because somebody couldn't understand why can't I see that guy? Well,
Yeah,
the part of it is there's a ton of wreckage, hell holes, smoke, and it's still 500 by 500 meters of built up terrain.
yep,
Um, if you've got a couple teams or a couple squads moving around in there, that's a lot of real estate. And even if they take a pot shot at you because they can see you, in this case you're moving and coming in there, you're visible to them.
yeah.
You're in terrain that's somewhat built up, but there's not a lot of smoke in your hex.
Yeah, there's no smoke in
You're
my hex
exposed.
because my hex, I didn't bother smoking. It still has 49% cover and 56% concealment. Like I wasn't gonna gain much by smoking that. So it's
Yeah,
like I'm
and
just
right
gonna
now there's a
section
lot
off
of,
the hex that's over here. So at least they won't also shoot. But you can see
and the other
they've
thing that
got
might
one
be
company of
taking you,
tanks left, and there's basically a company of infantry
And we
left.
know where that company of tanks is. It's on the 500. We're pretty sure still they're there, I think.
Yeah, it's somewhere in these 3 hexes. We've lost sight of it. Could be anywhere by now. You know, it's somewhere in this area. We don't know where it is right now.
now, do you have other infantry under that guy that's on top there getting beat up
Yeah, this is the 3 platoons of this company.
that are getting just smashed? Okay.
Yeah, and it's just one of those like it's uh
They're down the leg. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, they're and I
Uh,
mean I had them dismounted so that when the transports blew up, the guys inside didn't. Um, but
yeah.
also that means that the guys inside are subject to all the machine gun fire and automatic grenade launcher, which has night vision system on it, and so it's just like they missed their
Yeah,
timing to coordinate with the
have been
artillery.
might have been better off going right into the smoke.
Yeah, well, it's just a
Instead of
matter of
coming
like
out
they
of the
missed the
smoke into
timing
the
to
hex.
coordinate the artillery. Like I had to call in
Yeah.
another smoke barrage so they'd have this sectioned off at all. Because
Yep, no
all
plan
of this
ever goes
smoke
beyond
went away.
contact, folks.
Yeah, it was just one of those like, we've got things I would like to change. That makes long coordination with using delays and stuff really difficult. You know, this
What's your
unit
mortar doing?
way
Oh,
out
mortar's
ahead.
reloading right
It's
now.
reloading
Okay.
because I was like, okay, you're gonna start dropping right as everyone else is gonna be assaulting. Oh look, everyone missed their windows even more than they were already missing their windows, and we're just the barrages were done by half an hour or more.
What are your 155s doing?
Also reloading.
Also reloading.
Yeah, because I had
Yeah.
them in pretty much the same boat where they fired all their HE. They were reloading already when I had to issue that smoke order.
Oh.
So it's like they're even out of smoke now. So yeah, it's been very frustrating. Um, so yeah,
Well,
the
yeah,
tanks are
tanks
here.
are
Yep,
down. Yep.
we're gonna get at least a few of them here
Yep.
with our AT4s.
A few, 18-year-old teenagers have closed the distance with their laws
And
and
we
are trying
have
to.
okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit continue because we're actually still a little early even. Um, but we have actually forced the enemy into sudden death. Um, this is largely off killing that FARP, killing one of the two tank companies already,
That artillery
and our
killed.
artillery, even as limited as it was, still managing to do a lot of damage.
And again, for people who've said, "Oh, I can't kill tanks in infantry," with infantry, there you go. You're
Yeah, I
killing
mean,
tanks
yeah,
instantaneously.
just we've killed 3 already, and our tanks have done none of the work there.
And again, the big trick is you got to make sure that you've got anti-tank capability. If your troops don't carry any kind of anti-tank, then yeah, tanks are gonna just cause you to have a bad day.
Yeah.
Now we're getting tank fire. The M1s are opening up on
Yep. Yeah, our
Ws.
M1s did a great job killing the other tank company off. It was just this one that only suffered real light casualties. Here we go. So this mortar battery used all of its ammo, used all its smoke, and basically all its HE. They're already done rearming. This is what I'm saying. I love these mortar batteries. Now that I've gotten it into my head that just spend it, spend it, spend it. They're amazing.
And your assault, though costly, you have the location now.
I do. It was really costly. That company is basically completely dismounted. The only thing still mounted is the company HQ because it
Headquarters.
wasn't involved in the assault. And let's see. Yeah, they've got their AD unit that's over here. Like they're still mounted, but like the actual line platoons, they're down to 2 squads each, and it's really just one squad and the machine gun section, one
Was it
squad,
were the
and the grenade launcher
113s set to
section.
support or hide?
They were set to support because I wanted them to soak fire, um, and also just if they didn't die, they'd still have 50 cals helping support that would not die to anything but dedicated anti-tank fire. So like
Yeah.
if they ran out of anti-tank ammunition, those would be basically invulnerable 50 cals, which would be amazing. So, but I believe the RPGs can be used on infantry as well. So it was one of those like, if I can get them to just run out of RPGs, that either will make my tanks invulnerable so I can do what I'm doing here with my tanks, where I'm just going to move them right to the adjacent hex and they can help support. Um, or since I actually control that hex, I can just move them all the way in.
And that's some real close range direct support then if they're in that hex.
Yeah. But and we can see here, so the thermal sights on these Abrams, they do not care about it being nighttime. by comparison, you can see these are scouts also on a hill, and their vision is not nearly as good. If I look at this HQ unit, nothing. Here's our infantry. They can barely see anything. Um, yeah, 40% illumination, we're still pretty good, but compared to what you can get with these Abrams units with the thermals, they see really well. These guys are actually done hunting that FARP, so I can have them move deliberate up to like here. I did hold there. I want that to actually be a screen. We can kind of have these tanks kind of come in and do some close support um, on these other objectives. And they're going to have to get closer than I would normally like them to be to actually do anything.
Yeah, given the clutter and the built up, they may actually have to get in hex to do anything,
Yeah,
which is scary.
it is kind of
Definitely gonna want to
interesting,
get your
like
infantry in there.
how the American tank doctrine was really kind of building these Abrams to engage at longer ranges. But because so much of Europe does have longer firing ranges. But then, like, there was definitely this southern German area where how much of this map has a range longer than 2 kilometers? Like almost all
A
of
lot.
this map is 1 or 2 kilometer ranges or less, even. And
Yeah,
large
unless
parts
it's
of
super
southern
peak to
Germany are
peak.
like that. Which is definitely, I guess, what makes things like give a dragon to everyone so dangerous, right?
Yeah. Or as it's modeled in there now, with working with Jeff is, it's a volley fire tactic.
Oh yeah.
So you set up, you get in a good position, and it's not one guy shooting. It's the whole unit shooting. Um, try to get a couple kills in,
I
and then
might
you run
do
away and set up and do it again if you have ammo remaining.
is I'm gonna push this scout forward here. I don't think they'll necessarily even
We've
get
got a
there in time.
helicopter you can sacrifice.
Yeah, I do. I do still have this helicopter here. And now that they're actually starting, actually cancel here. Are you actually doing this, or yeah? See, we're look at the delay. It's gone so sideways here. I'm basically just gonna have to reissue that movement order to these guys. Because that's just so far off. I don't. Where these guys are also. Yeah, I'm gonna have to just completely reissue that order.
Yeah, you got about an hour left to
Yeah,
take those
like I'll be
objectives.
lucky if these guys even make it to their objective and by the end of the scenario here.
Yeah, it's
Right.
a long way.
Um,
It's a long way to go dismounted.
yeah.
If they're dismounted, they're not going to get there in an hour.
All right. Well, we're just gonna issue those orders. I don't think they're necessarily gonna make it in time. It's fine. We've already got the victory through the fact that we've so far suffered 19% casualties. We'll suffer a few more, but we've already got the enemy down to
They're already,
25%.
shutting down.
Like time for a Leroy Jenkins maneuver. Yeah, I mean basically, um,
Yeah.
definitely one of those like I should have
I
just
think your initial
issued.
barrage has really kind of lit the guy up.
Oh yeah, just definitely guys, spend your artillery. Um, as this simulation is teaching, and real life is regrettably having to teach everyone, the artillery and indirect means of attacking the enemy are devastating. Use lots of it. Oh, here, and there's our M109 batteries done rearming as well. This is admittedly, while these 102 millimeter mortars or whatever they are, maybe would have been better off hitting the HQ while the M109s hit the tanks. But that's fine. It'll at least suppress the tanks for a little bit.
It'll
here.
be degrading their readiness, yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely like a significant mechanic here of just keeping the enemy readiness suppressed. That was the goal with that initial plan with those barrages, is that we would keep the enemy readiness down while our guys moved in, and that would make it so that our guys could move in more safely. Because yeah, here we've got, I'm not sure what this was. This might have originally, no, UAZs. Oh, this is the HQ unit, I think. So it had a 50 cal team that is just finishing off this unit here, just no problem. Like, right? It's
Yeah,
one 50 cal team.
it's peculiar terrain there because it's just low ground that's absolutely open and clear. It's like a meadow in a
Yeah.
small depression. So
Yeah.
you're just in the open there, advancing against the 50 cal.
Yeah. And I mean, let's see. So hopefully this squad. Oh, is this just a 50 cal team left? That's exciting. That's exciting. All right. Yeah, we're just gonna let this play at this point because, as you said, there's less than an hour left in this scenario. So
Once you got about
once
got about 40 minutes left, the friction of battle, there's not a lot you can't execute on a new plan in that time.
Yeah, yeah. I think issuing an assault order, you're more or less locked into a delay that's going to be around 40 minutes or more. So it's like just issuing that assault order is a significant amount of delay. By the time they actually act on it, you're not doing anything in less than an hour, really.
Which is something I'm a big fan of for Flashpoint. It's frustrating, but it's very authentic. There's some strategy games where you send your brigade forward and then
They
you don't
immediately
like
start acting.
You don't like what you see, you turn them around, and they just immediately on a dime flip and run back. Whereas in Flashpoint, you see your failure and you have to live with it for a good 20-30 minutes before you can do something about it.
Yeah.
And it's the difference between, playing a more of a chess style game, which if you're looking at things like, I'm trying to even think like the Panzer General series and style of games where I've got a 10 factor unit, so I move up my infantry and I hit you for a couple points. I bring up a tank, hit you, back it off, hit you with some artillery, back it off. I've never been a big fan of that just because it's more gamey than it is kind of realistic.
Yeah. It's chess, but you gotta write down your moves and execute them 5 moves ahead.
Yeah.
And hopefully it was the right move. Still, by the time you get to that.
Yeah, and the focus of Flashpoint campaigns is you're not the tanker, you're not the grunt, you're the commander back at the headquarters, back at the talk, who's put together the plan, trying to execute it, getting that feedback that, oh, these guys are doing this, these guys got killed, and making those adjustments, and then those commands are going up and down the the communications chain, and there is time, and there is, in reality, it takes time, there is friction. People are like, well, why can't I just move on an instant? Hey, we gotta go over here.
Yeah.
Mainly because, especially
it takes a lot of time to tell 40 guys what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And pick up your stuff and get your kit and grab your ammo and load up on the track. And even like an assault, you just can't say, oh, we're gonna go assault the town. Well, who's going in? What direction? Here you had a plan. These guys were coming the north, the south, the east. Here's the rough timing we wanted, even though it went to hell pretty quick.
There's
but that's life. It's you got multiple things on multiple vectors, and you got to deal with them.
If you want a good show to kind of like take a look at what that looks like, Generation Kill's a really good one, because there's some episodes where they stop in the middle of nowhere for 20 minutes waiting for the LT to hear from the captain, to hear from the major, to hear from the colonel.
Yeah.
It takes a while. So-
and a marginal. So
Yes,
what you
yes.
got.
And only a marginal because we did the massive casualties, right? Like to the enemy. Because otherwise it would have been slid back by a star. Because you get a bonus star for forcing the enemy into sudden death.
Yes.
Yeah, in order to get a decisive win naturally, we had to get 88%. We hit 67.
So where are the Soviets getting their victory points from? Because they still got a decent
I
number of
think
them.
all off our own casualties because we own all of the actual objectives.
Okay, so it's those helicopters. It's the
Yeah,
Yeah,
they wiped out a
yeah.
company. They wiped out a company basically of
yeah,
infantry.
they
Oh, and the
so
tank losses added up.
yeah, so I
It didn't take a lot.
lost.
You didn't lose a unit, but if you look,
I did lose
there's a
one
lot of
unit over
3s and
here.
2s.
From C Company, one of the platoons didn't get their delay orders right, and they went out ahead and got run over by the enemy
Got
tanks.
smashed.
And we did lose, I think,
You lost a lot of Cobras.
2
Well,
here,
go
1
into
here, and I lost 5 out of the 6 Cobras. So
pull up the scenario piece so we can see the end game.
yeah, so Butcher's Bill here.
Yeah, because that'll tell you right there.
We lost 8 of our tanks, so that's 2 platoons of tanks. Almost half the transports, right? And that was obviously this unit that got completely dismounted, but C Company did finally show up here at the end, and so actually they only had 1 lost, so it was almost all of that. Oh, we did have that 1 platoon from A Company that got
They didn't get the
completely
delay,
wiped
yeah.
out because they didn't get their delays correct either.
I think you also lost a platoon of ITOs because of a delay snafu as well.
Most of it, I don't remember where the other 2 guys are.
I'm
They're,
assuming
I
you
think
lost.
under
He lost. He
here.
lost. He lost two. He lost two of his Zaitos.
3. Oh yeah, 2 and the HQ for that squad, platoon, whatever it is. Yeah. The other unit was
Helicopters
fine.
were an expensive loss too.
Yeah, the helicopters, because those things, I don't remember how expensive these are. These are 116 points each. The Abrams, those are
Abrams.
156 points each. So 8 Abrams is a giant, 300, 1,200 points.
Yeah.
And then another, so 1,700 points just in the expensive hardware. So yeah, 1,700-ish points just in the expensive hardware out of their 2,600.
That's how tactical and decisive becomes marginal.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
to be sure.
Force preservation is a tough business.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yep.
I think Jeff would have a talking to you about this if he was here right now about
Oh, for sure.
the use of certain assets.
Yeah.
Armor. You did what you I think were supposed to, which was ran around in the enemy's rear, got them into good supporting positions, and didn't drive into the town with them yourself because it's the very fast way to throw away these expensive pieces of equipment.
Yeah, as we saw, they're the most expensive. I think that I have other, because I think the M109s are not that bad because they're such a light armor vehicle. Yeah, their armor's so thin that they're only 88 points. Only.
I think your bombardments and attack pushed a lot of the enemy north. They're not really where you would wanted them to be in the
Yeah, it certainly pushed
locations.
these tanks out of position. Our own movements.
And there's remnant. I mean, you're looking at
this
machine
company's
guns and some mortars and some other bits here.
yeah, I don't know where this AD normally sits. This HQ did get pushed out and beat up. These guys are kind of roughly where they usually are. I don't know. I think this Tunguska is usually up here. I'm not sure why he moved down into the valley.
So yeah, the you did run around to the rear areas. In hindsight, maybe retasking them a little faster to sort of try to scoop up that northern bowl there, might have gotten you a couple extra victory points for just killing
Oh
more
yeah.
Soviets.
Yeah,
But
getting these tanks, maybe like splitting off I think it was the HQ or in one of the platoons, and having them help support this push. Um, and I probably should have done it as move to your staging positions as one order, and then do the assault once it was time as a second order, and that would have fixed a lot of our delay issues.
overall, good showing. I think good use of armor. If this scenario doesn't have the most Soviet assets in the rear, but getting the tank company into the Soviet rear areas and shooting up their artillery is an exceptionally good use of armor because so much of the Soviets' killing power is concentrated in these massive artillery batteries that they bring to the battlefield.
Yep.
Whereas NATO artillery is quite often off map, I find, and so you don't always have that option if you're playing as the Soviets.
Yeah, you have to put yourself in counter battery if you can get range to the enemy artillery. Brigadier Rodriguez skipped all the force preservation lessons back at West Point. Wait, were there lessons on that? Was I supposed to be attending those?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What was this about economy of force? I'm going to send a tank company to wipe out a scout platoon. Let's go.
Yep. Yep. So even with just one artillery battery, our artillery battery caused 81 casualties, subunit casualties, with 37 mech and 34 infantry being the dominant portion of that. So definitely that goes to show, don't necessarily stand in the most obvious locations, right? Because like most of those casualties are blind fire. Just like those look like the best spots for the enemy to be. I'm gonna shell the crap out of them.
And those were prepared to, or not fixed positions, but they were dug in. And so,
Yeah.
no matter how much you dig in, if it's a bunch of 155s dropping on your head,
Yeah. So that M109 battery, it's I think oops, wrong unit. Let's select the correct unit here. So they have 30 rounds of high explosive each across 8, so that's 240, and I emptied them 2.5 times, so that's about 600, a little more than 600
they're
rounds
thereabouts.
of 155 millimeter high explosive dumped
Pretty much all
in 6 hours.
pretty much all dumped in 3 hexes too.
Yeah.
Pretty tight areas.
All dumped in those 3 hexes. Oh no, they not quite all. At the end, they were firing on the HQ unit, um, but almost all in those 3 hexes for sure. So yeah, you put close to 500 rounds in what is that? 500 by 1500 meter space, give or take. You're gonna have a hard time finding anywhere that's not getting hit by a round, and that's how much did our mortars actually cause? Only 2 Recce and an Arty. Yeah, they don't necessarily cause as many casualties. I think a lot of that is the fact that they spent a lot of time bombarding the same
Right.
hexes that the M109s had already pulverized. So there weren't as many casualties left for the mortars to inflict. But just the fact that they carry 68 rounds times 6, they're carrying a lot more ammo, which can really let you cause suppression and that readiness drop for a very long time, if that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Another real good example of how, even though this is a tank-centric scenario, why combined arms is so important because you didn't try to attack a full-strength BMP company dug in with ATGMs. You didn't
Oh yeah,
you didn't throw an Abrams company at that. You used the artillery, and then the army got up on, good supporting positions after the artillery had done some work, and then the infantry went in. The armor followed the infantry. Just decent, solid combined arms work, and you didn't get any companies wiped out doing something stupid like driving into a town that you didn't know it was in. The infantry, pretty much, once you got close, the infantry had cleared everything out first, and then the armor shows up.
Yes. Yeah, that was so, B Company here, massive casualties getting into the town. But once they've got it clear, I was able to bring up these two tank platoons, which, okay, not super necessary by the time we got to that point. But if there had still been lots of enemy assets, like if this tank company was still over in this hex, it would have been blocking this A company coming down the road. Having these two tank platoons here to finish knocking out the enemy tanks here is massive.
with all that armor that you have up on that ridge line as well, if the enemy wanted to say start repositioning units or call in reinforcements, um, you don't quite have the North Road cut, but they'd have some real trouble shifting into new positions
Oh yeah.
without taking some really substantial losses. And that's the thing too about tanks is they can really, once you get them on sort of a nice overwatch position, they can cut roads. They can force the enemy to really not take certain routes. You can really deny a lot of approaches.
hmm Yeah, so, this tank unit on the ridge still managed to get 4 enemy tanks knocked out. Um, and let's see, these guys, so when the enemy tank company was over here, they knocked out 8 tanks. And let's see, what was the other unit? Scored 3 tanks and a couple of recce's. This guy managed to score an APC, which, okay, that's nice. Yeah, the HQ here didn't do much, but yeah, I mean the tank's ability to not have to slow down to be dangerous is massive. It let this tank company or platoon just almost on its own clean up that entire FARP. I think this guy got a little bit of it too.
So I think we're almost ready to wrap up. Anybody got any closing remarks that they want to make?
I think my basic comment is, when you're dealing with armor, and both from using yours and trying to kill your opponents, know your capabilities. Take a look at the data. Am I dealing with, an M1 or an M60?
Oh yeah.
Am I fighting T55s or T80s? Um, then, like we were saying, the next thing, what are my, avenues of fire? Is this going to be up close where I really don't want to bring my tanks into it as much? Is it long range fire where I'm good standing in, a couple decent positions and just kill the enemy as he comes up? You got to look, what's my weather? It's like we said earlier, there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's not a, roll of a dice or a coin toss. Um, you can kill M1A1s, if they're out in the open. If you've got, superior number or just superior location. If I catch M1s moving in the open and I'm sitting in good high cover terrain, I'm going to chew them up. I don't know anybody who saw my video back in December where my poor West German Leopard 2s got mauled in the open. You can lose advanced tanks to the enemy if you're caught in just a bad spot. They're great, but at the same time, they're expensive. Like we saw here, just losing a handful of them, kind of cost a victory level
Yep.
for the force preservation. There's a lot that goes into, I'll say, modern warfare.
Yeah, the T80's relatively cheap. Like the T80B1 is about the best, and the B with the anti-tank missile that serves as the platoon leader and company leader tanks. Um, 83 and 87 points. They're not much more than half the price of your Abrams. Um, but there's definitely, some capability difference between the platforms. So you got to work it out so that you can trade really at least 3-1, if not better, tank for tank. Um,
Yep.
these BMPs that are everywhere are going to outclass your M113s. And yeah, okay, they're about double the victory point cost. but 22 is not exactly a lot, and there's a lot of BMPs, so they're dangerous. You got to respect them, but they're soft, so you can get rid of them.
I think one thing that Jim pointed out that's really true is knowing some of these numbers that are important. There's a few big ones, the cheat ones that you can kind of get away with learning. And one, if you ever fight Americans, is 3750, which is the range of a tow missile. So if you're ever fighting
Yeah.
Americans, knowing that it's at about 3.5, just a smidge under 4 kilometers, that's the danger zone. And so if you ever look at terrain and go, am I outside of the 4 kilometer range? I'm probably kind of safe to maneuver. But if you see a piece of terrain that you're pretty sure there's American infantry and with tows, as soon as you cross that under 4 kilometers, you are vulnerable. You are in a dangerous place. So yeah, learning a few key numbers like that is very useful when you're plotting your maneuver plan and knowing where danger is and where it isn't.
Yep.
And take a look at your forces. There's training levels. Are you dealing with regular troops, veterans, elite troops? That makes a difference. Readiness is important. Morale is important. You can have the best equipment in the world, but if you're poorly trained, tired, and your morale is low, you're not that effective in combat. And that's reflected in the engine.
Yep. So this
Some of these
tank
units
company,
that are
58% morale,
yeah, what's the
60% readiness. This last
yeah.
squad from this company, it's not even a squad, it's a team. 60% morale, 72% readiness, and no ammo left. Like all of that gets factored in.
There's a couple scenarios I've noticed with, I think it's specifically Czech units. They tend to be somewhat low morale, and you'll find that they're withdrawing when you really don't want them to. Mind you, you can change that throughout the course of a game. If they score a lot of kills and are put in a good position and do well, that's reflected. Um,
Yep. And it's one of the big reasons to use like the suppression barrages on enemy units in hexes that you were assaulting into is while that barrage is active, it keeps their readiness down, which significantly impacts. I think accuracy is probably the most direct impact. That and the ability to receive orders. Um, those two things I think are the most directly impacted by a readiness reduction. Um,
Accuracy, and technically you can get into rate of fire issues.
oh, is
If
it
you're
rate of
highly
fire as
suppressed,
well?
you don't shoot as much. So
Yeah.
and
So,
it also can impact your ability to spot. To be honest,
oh yeah,
there's a component there too. So if you're basically kind of hiding and keeping your head down, you're not doing a lot of shooting and you're not doing a lot of spotting.
yeah. And it doesn't necessarily take having big artillery batteries to do that. So suppression barrages can be really valuable if timed correctly. That I didn't do here. Kind of similar to artillery. Major Alvega asks, do you guys think the RDHE impact on tanks is balanced? It seems a bit on the high side for some armor on a 500-meter hex. And I know this is a question that comes up a lot. And we're working on this. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Jim, before we hop off here?
Yeah, because it's all right,
It comes up a lot.
what the basic issue is we look at the size of the shell. So basically, how much explosive force and what is this, lethal and you know, wounding distance that a shell has. When we model a strike, there's a 500 by 500 meter box. We consider units that your units depending on their order. So if they're moving, say hasty, it's a column of units, and they're kind of tightly packed. If you're dispersed, screening, then you can say they're spread out in that hex. Then we actually drop a ice munition. So in the case of like if there's 60 HE shells landing, we plot those 60 shells coming down in that 500 box and see what hits and what near hits. A near hit on a soft target can definitely take it out. You need more of a direct hit on a hard target like a tank
Hmm.
to have a chance of knocking it out. Now, in this game, one thing people look at is whether it's a soft kill, movement kill, weapon kill, or a brew up, it's out of action and it's no longer combat effective. A lot of artillery barrages, even up to 155, generally knock out tanks. And that's probably going to be you lost a track, an engine, a gun, crew loss of some kind, spalling from a near miss, or even a direct hit that doesn't blow up the tank but knocks it out of service. Um, we look at all that when there's an ICM strike and there's you know 500 submunitions. All 500 get plotted on the 500-meter 5x5 board and look to see if there's hits. Now, one thing people have to realize, and I did this about a year plus ago, because somebody complained about the effectiveness of 4 tubes of 105 kind of versus like 6 or 8 tubes of a 155. And I put the graphic up. I said, well, here's your box.
Yeah.
Here's the number of shells. Here's the size of your 105s. And you look at it, and there's a lot of open space and a lot of space for, your subunits to basically not get hit. Now, when you plot the 155, and it's not just, oh, it's 105 to 155, so it's about 30% bigger. No, it's more like 3 times greater explosive power. So when there's 8 tubes on a full rate of fire, and there's 24, 30 shells coming down, there's not a lot of empty in that box.
Yeah.
So if you're a soft unit, you're probably getting hit. Now, there's some mitigating factors. If you're in the open, it's not good. You're probably going to see a lot of loss because those shells don't have anything else to be chewed up on. If you're in a city, forest, other built up areas, less damaging. It's tougher for the shell to kill you, for the explosive effect to directly get to you, but it still can. Um, the current model, the first couple of salvos that come in will do the most damage because your forces are caught in whatever state they are, generally in motion, maybe in defensive. Now, once that initial barrage lands, we give capability of units, what we say, going to ground or, you know, dropping down, going prone, moving and hiding, and the ability to kill them or hit them goes down. Not large amount, but enough that it makes a difference over time.
Yep.
So, that initial barrage, especially if it's spotted, now here a lot of damage was done because a lot of shells were poured on a
Yeah.
given location with a fair large number of troop.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
might
you're
have
going to take
something we
losses.
need to look at with suppression specifically because it is interesting. Like all of the BMPs in these 3 line rifle units are KIA instead of fallen out, which is weird. Especially then all
I'm
the
going to say,
infantry is fallen out. Fallen out is actually not too surprising from unguided artillery barrage. I think that has a pretty high likelihood of only causing fallen out, not
yeah.
KIA. But
Well, and what you're
it's
going to run into here is, you're looking at, there's actually a BMP that survived.
yeah, in
One
this
is,
unit, yeah.
yeah, I think this unit, you have the bad die rolling day.
Yeah, it
And,
might
and
just be a
again,
bad
that
die roll for the enemy.
it's a BMP. It's at
Yes.
best, it's got, 20, 30 millimeters of armor.
Yeah, we rate it
A
as 50 on the
155.
front arc, but I
Yeah,
mean, I
so look at
think
the side. The side kinetic is on the
yeah,
hull. You got what,
20.
13 millimeters?
Yeah. Oh
20,
yeah, 12 millimeters on
yeah.
the sides.
So if a 155 round explodes probably within about 10 meters of that vehicle,
It's going
probably going
crumple.
to kill it.
I,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do I do have an anecdote from combat mission of one time driving a BMP past a Dishka, getting shot in the rear, and the BMP catastrophically exploding, munition cook off and all from being
Yeah.
shot in the rear by a 50 cal. So
Well,
it does
the other
happen.
the other problem with BMPs is they carry their fuel in the doors in the back.
Yeah.
They do.
So if they get hit in the back, it tends to set off the fuel, which in turn will then set off the ammo. So they've
Yeah.
got, yeah, that's a little bit of an issue. But again,
all issues with the
you know,
Bradley aside, it's not like the Bradley's dangers. If we look at, I'm forgetting Pentagon Wars. Like,
yeah,
dangers aside of the Bradley, it's not an issue unique to the Bradley. It's just generally a problem that IFVs have is you're sacrificing a lot of armor and still carrying a lot of ammo. And that
yeah,
means you
and troops
don't
and
really want to
everything else.
be inside that thing when it starts taking fire if it's anything of any oomph more than assault rifle.
Well, and one thing here, this unit was it in a built up area or
Yes,
was it in
these are
the
the
open when it got
three
hit?
three line units that are in the built up areas. It's just that's what I'm saying. I don't
Well,
think it's
yeah,
unreasonable for us to cause this many casualties. There might be something I should look at in the code with the fact that they're all KIAs and not there's no falling out among any of them.
like I said, that could just be, it's a bad day. You got some killed infantry.
Yeah,
There was one BMP I think that was
there's one
at least
BMP
one of
left
the
out of
units.
all three companies.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, you got that many shells raining in from multiple salvos. It's not like the BMP can go hide in a building like the troops
Oh
can.
yeah, yeah. No, they were definitely going to end up
So
dead. It's purely a matter of
it seems a little
some
odd,
of
but
them
again,
probably should have been falling out instead of KIA. But
my guess is if you replayed this scenario, from beginning scratch, you
yeah,
may run into it, look at that unit later, and they're all falling out.
yeah, um,
They just happen, unfortunately, to be more directly hit than indirectly hit in the case of this barrages.
yeah.
Mm.
Um,
I know
and they don't have a lot of armor.
we had a research
So
paper we were bouncing between us a couple of weeks ago, I think, that was talking about just casualties among line units can hit
yep,
insane numbers to near 100% among the infantry, but the like firepower of the battalion is like barely reduced because the artillery of the battalion or the regiment or the brigade is at or near 100%. And
it's
like
still there.
that's
Yeah,
the casualty dealer is that artillery, that indirect fire.
yeah, and it carries through. It's again, I think a lot of players that come from the World War II frame of, I call in the shots and I got to adjust them, and there's this process of time and slow rate to get on target. And
Hmm.
and again, back then, the dispersion of shells was huge. The ability to accurately know where I am and you are, to adjust fire was rough math.
Yeah.
Now you get into the 80s, well, even into the 70s, but you get into the 70s and 80s with
GPS.
the
It's
computers,
amazing.
well, computers, and then the
Yeah.
GPS, and then the fact that within the setup of an 8-gun battery, when you look at the buckets you can put those rounds in, it's a hell of a lot smaller than what it was in the 40s.
Yeah.
You might have to throw 1,000 rounds to do the same damage that 20 rounds, do today. Well, today definitely, I can kill a unit with a round today. Yeah, we're seeing that in the Ukraine on a daily basis.
Yeah.
In the 80s, I can put a lot of those shells rapidly and fairly accurately onto the target uh, box. So which is why we don't really worry too much about it going outside of the 500-meter box with an artillery strike.
Yeah.
The capability really from both sides is there to do that.
Yeah.
I
Even
believe it.
if we
Um,
plotted spotting rounds, like a spotting round, and you're probably hitting a house-sized target after that one spotting round.
yeah,
I
And
think it
and
was.
and, and Jeff, if we had Jeff, he'd tell you, if, or Mike in here, who's doing that stuff for the Canadians in the 80s and 90s. You didn't need it anymore.
yeah,
I
it was
call
all
out a
measured
grid
in already.
square, and yeah, and yeah, you know where you are, you know where the target is, and the computers and the meteorology and the ballistics are all such that, yeah, if I want to hit that one house in the middle of the town, with 10 rounds, I'm going to do it.
I believe it was Hapless, usually Hapless, who's a YouTuber that sometimes does content for us for Combat Mission. He had a forward observer team and a target reference point and 155s in Black Sea, and I think he was having rounds falling within a minute of calling it in. So just ridiculous response times that are capable nowadays.
And they are kind of that fast, and again, it's the technology. If you're talking a handful of guys with some radios and some gear back in the 40s trying to say, hey, they're here, we're this. Oh, you went short 500 meters, adjust. Up, you went wide by 200 meters, pull back. Yeah, it takes forever. But when you're looking, especially in the command nets of the 80s, it's like, okay, targets at this coordinate grid, moving this fast this way. Let it rain. Yeah, within a minute, that stuff's coming down. Especially if you have direct access to it. If it's in your, I say basically in your chain of command to get it. Now, if you need something bigger or deeper, it may take a couple more minutes to get through to get it allocated. But that stuff is coming quickly. It's coming fairly accurately. If you call in like a rocket strike, that's going to take out, that, like I said, you can erase a grid square, which is
Very
a
quick.
kilometer on the side.
Yep.
If for the
especially with ICM.
for our viewers, if you want an example for World War II, read about the Battle of Elsenborn Ridge, and that's with World War II technology. So think about what its capabilities are now.
Yeah.
In terms of artillery playing a decisive role in a battle.
And I left the artillery supporting all units, but like if I set it up so that they're reporting directly to a given a single unit or a HQ and all of its subunits, so there's only one or maybe two hops, you're looking at response times of 2 to like 4 minutes. The only reason it's going to hit 17 minutes here is if it's got to come from the other battalion, so it's got to go all the way up the HQ of the other
It's
battalion,
got to
then
go
all
up
the
and
way
down
down
and back up
mine.
again.
That's going to potentially have a lot of hops. You might hit this 17 minutes of latency. That's one of the, I mentioned it earlier, I don't like that this mortar unit has its HQ as a separate thing because that adds a hop and it's not right, like that HQ isn't really gonna leave this mortar unit, so that might be an area where we can improve this scenario design. But we definitely model that where you can have very short response times on your artillery. Even the Warsaw Pact here, if I look at him, if it's 1 to 2 hops, that's 3 to 9 minutes to respond to a request. That's not super long necessarily. Um, it's definitely longer than the NATO's doing. But, if you have it responding to requests from a specific recon unit that you push forward, 3-minute response time on your artillery coming out of a recon unit that is really hard to spot, you can do some serious damage with just a recon unit and a battery of 120 millimeter mortars.
Yeah, that is one thing this game points out pretty quickly is the whole recon counter recon battle. It's real and you better fight it or it's going to cost you.
Bad Optics in the chat is
Oh.
mentioning too that you can task individual batteries to support individual battalions.
Yeah, individual battalions, as I was saying, individual recon units so that you can just shorten that number of hops can do wonders for you. Especially if you know that most of your force isn't going to see any enemies for a while. Like if the only guys who are going to be doing any spotting is your recon units, have all of your artillery report directly to those recon units for the first, hour, 2 hours while you're getting everyone else into position or the enemy is still preparing their assault. Letting those recon units get those fast response times out of your artillery will do wonders for you.
I think we did this last time too. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves
Yes.
because next episode is actually on artillery for the tutorial series.
That'll be so much fun. We've got some really good scenarios for doing artillery.
Yeah, we'll have to see if we can get Mike to come in and chat in that one too.
Yeah. So expect
Being a
the
Canadian officer.
expect the tutorial episode on that on the Matrix YouTube channel sometime. I think we have it scheduled for the 29th, so late January, and we'll do the stream afterwards. So expect to see that soonish. Stream TBD.
Yeah.
For now.
We'll work it out.
Yep. So I think we've covered just about everything. We've been, going on for quite a while now, 2.5 hours, I think. So I think we can wrap it up here, eh, fellas?
Yep, sounds good to me.
I'm good unless there's any other questions.
Nope, not too many questions today. Mostly just people making fun of how I throw people into the grinder, but that's fine. All right.
All right. Take care,
I'll
everybody.
see
Have a
you
good
guys.
weekend.
Thanks, folks. Have a good weekend.
And stream. I look forward to seeing you guys in a couple of weeks where I'll be back streaming some more Flashpoint campaigns on Monday. Ciao.